DC's secret Marvel advisor, Batman's teacher breaks the multiverse. Like, share, and subscribe. Episode 31, The First Encounter of Iron and Shield. I've never seen such an annoying guy before. I dare say if he were on the battlefield, his superior would have shot him countless times. Steve paced back and forth in the middle of Schiller's psychological clinic living room, hands on hips, fists waving as he passionately voiced his opinions. He appeared like an enraged lion, his military demeanor on full display. Steve continued, I should really give him a bear hug and see if that damn iron shell of his is as fragile as glass. Now, to understand why Steve was so angry, let's go back to last night. Last night, Peter had finished his final exams and was itching to wander around New York. He had been cooped up studying for weeks and missed the feeling of gliding through the cool breeze above the city. But recently, his relationship with Gwen had been heating up rapidly. After the exams, Gwen had invited him to a party, thinking Peter was too reclusive and needed more interaction with classmates. So, she insisted on dragging him along to the post-exam celebration. Peter wanted to be a superhero, but his feelings for Gwen were too strong to resist. Reluctantly, he agreed to Gwen's invitation, and they happily headed off to the party. It was predictable that the little spider would come out to roam after the exams, and Peter wasn't the only one who thought so. The genius Tony Stark was also on the lookout for Spider-Man. Stark had a legitimate reason to find Spider-Man. Peter had developed his own spider web shooter, which had caught Stark's attention for its scientific research potential. He planned to talk to Peter about interning at Stark Industries during his break and, incidentally, making a Spider-Man suit for him. Although Stark was known for his arrogance, he had some discretion. He knew he couldn't fly into Peter's school in his steel combat suit, that would be too conspicuous. So, he waited for Peter to finish his exams and meet him in the skies over New York City. His plan seemed sound, but unfortunately, Peter had chosen his budding romance with Gwen over his superhero career. Iron Man hovered over New York City for a while, but there was no sign of the figure swinging between high-rise buildings. Although he didn't encounter Spider-Man, another person looking for him accidentally crossed paths with Iron Man. Captain America could jump between high-rise buildings even without the help of a spider web. He was different from Peter, a young kid with powers. Captain America's strength had been honed through rigorous training, and he had unparalleled control over his body. Before he could find the kid described by Schiller, he saw a flashy red and gold mech armor flying towards him. Steve stopped on the rooftop of a high-rise building, and the mech armor floated in the air. A voice came from the other side, look, another little hero. Isn't there already a spider kid swinging around New York? What's your codename, Aryan Superman? Steve retorted, I thought modern people would have a little more manners. So, who are you? The Steel Warrior in a turtle shell? Surprised you don't know Iron Man? Are you from the Stone Age or something? Don't tell me you were dazzled by the glory of my cool mech armor, ha ha ha. Iron Man was indeed quite famous in New York. Despite Stark's often straightforward approach to saving people, his mech armor was undeniably cool. Countless onlookers had captured Iron Man's heroic deeds, and there was even a fan group that had created a dedicated website, giving him a significant following across America. I am a bit old-fashioned, Steve replied. But at least you should know some courtesy. Shouldn't you introduce yourself before speaking? Stark didn't mind revealing his true identity because he could tell that the person in front of him also had special abilities. After all, ordinary people couldn't jump several meters in one leap. Since they were colleagues of sorts, there was no need to hide, so he said, as you can see, I'm Stark, the owner of Stark Industries. Who else could develop such an impressive mech armor? Steve's expression suddenly changed, and he asked, You're Stark? Your last name is Stark? Then, what's your relationship with Howard Stark? The mech armor in front of him descended, and Stark replied, Don't mention that name to me. What's it to you, weirdo? What relationship do I have with him? You have no relationship with him, yet you inherited Stark Industries. Steve's expression grew even stranger. Before Stark could continue taunting him, a powerful force struck him, sending him flying. Indeed, Captain America wasn't the same as the young spider. In the comics, he had shattered Stark's mech armor more than once. Stark's current mech armor hadn't undergone several upgrades yet, and Iron Man was far from his peak. But Captain America, he always remained at his peak. Sparks erupted inside the Mark V, and Jarvis urgently sounded alarms. Stark was in shock. He tried to maneuver the mech armor to break free, but he had never encountered such a monstrous opponent before. Steve's strength even made the advanced metal alloy shell seem as brittle as a cookie. Steve grabbed him by the waist, pinning Stark to the ground. Then, he began pounding the mech armor's faceplate with his fists, shattering it. Jarvis was frantically sounding alarms, and Stark yelled in anger, "Initiate an electric shock." Jarvis replied, "An electric shock will render the mech armor unusable." I said, "Initiate the electric shock." With a deafening roar, Mark 5 lit up with a brilliant electric surge. Steve was blasted away, and Stark was forcibly ejected from the mech armor, crashing to the ground. Both of them turned ashen, their hair standing on end from the shock. "You damn thief!" Steve exclaimed. Stark retorted, "You lunatic. Why did you suddenly attack me? I don't even know you." "But I'm friends with old Stark." Steve quickly got up, clutching Stark's collar, and demanded, "How did you get your hands on Stark Industries? Where is Howard's descendant? What have you done to him?" Suddenly, Jarvis interjected through Stark's headphones, "Based on Mr. Schiller's provided microexpression analysis logic, there might be a massive misunderstanding here." Stark angrily shut off his headphones, saying, "Do we really need to read microexpressions in this situation?" He looked at Steve defiantly, despite being held by the collar. "I suspect you don't understand English. When did I say I had no relationship with Howard?" Steve maintained an exasperated eye contact, treating Stark as if he were a forgetful elderly patient. "Damn it. I heard you, but that's not what I meant." With a reluctant acknowledgement, Stark turned his gaze aside. "He's my father, but my genius creations have nothing to do with him." Steve threw Stark to the ground, causing him to cry out in pain. Steve held his arm and said, "You're nothing like Howard. Your father was a brave warrior, and you? Do you even realize how annoying you are?" Indeed, Stark's arrogance was deeply ingrained, making him appear unpleasant to anyone who encountered him. Stark sat up and exclaimed, "Are you some sort of delusional patient? How could you possibly know my father? Is this a past life thing?" Steve couldn't be bothered to explain. After coming out tonight and failing to find his target, he ran into Howard's descendant, who looked completely different from his old friend. This left Steve feeling frustrated. Suddenly, Steve heard a rush of wind, but lost in thought, he reacted slowly. A mech armor flew directly at him, grabbing him and tossing him downstairs. Captain America couldn't be killed from such a height, and Steve rolled on the ground before spotting Stark on the rooftop, mocking him. Then, the new mech armor armed itself onto him, the face mask rising as Stark said, "Looks like you might indeed be a friend of my father's, as my friends wouldn't react as slowly as you." With that, he flew away. Steve pounded the ground in frustration. And so, the scene of Steve berating Stark unfolded in Schiller's psychological clinic. If Stark were just a stranger, Steve wouldn't be so angry, but he had fought alongside Howard. The thought of his old friend's son turning out this way made Steve both angry and somewhat ashamed, feeling that he hadn't fulfilled his educational responsibility. After Steve left, Coulson called Schiller. "Dr. Schiller, I have to acknowledge that my earlier praise may have been a formality, but now it definitely isn't." Captain suddenly became spirited. As soon as he returned, he went to the training room and beat up a dozen trainers. Director Nick talked to him about preparing a special operations team, and he immediately agreed, even requesting a special training room from the agency. "My God, Captain America, he's been reborn." Schiller chuckled and said, "Controlling one's positive emotions doesn't necessarily stem from a sense of responsibility or ideal aspirations. It could also be anger." Coulson, somewhat puzzled, asked, "Captain seems a bit angry. What happened? Did he run into some trouble?" "He did run into a bit of trouble, but it's not something you can deal with." With that, Schiller hung up the telephone. His doorbell rang, and Peter, in a school uniform jacket and carrying a backpack, opened the clinic's door. He waved at Schiller and said, "Hey, doctor, you won't believe the amazing party I just attended." Schiller sized him up, and it was clear that Peter had been drinking. He probably just came from the party, reeking of alcohol, and didn't dare go home, so he ended up here. Schiller said, "You should really thank Stark, he took a beating for you." Little Spider-Man looked bewildered. "What?" Episode 32, The Antiques and the New Generation. "Did you decide to intern at Stark Industries?" Schiller asked. Peter took a big sip of his soup and a bite of sausage, before replying, "Yes, that way I can explain where my money comes from. I told my uncle that Stark Industries wanted to buy out my job opportunity, not only offering me a significant sum of money in advance, but also covering my college tuition." "Does your uncle believe it?" Schiller inquired. Peter replied, "Actually, my uncle has always known that I excel in academics and have a bit of a genius mind. Now that I finally have the opportunity, he's thrilled for me. But Peter put down his bowl, looking somewhat embarrassed. He continued, Mr. Schiller, I was wondering if I could stay with you for a few days. Our house is quite old, and after my uncle and aunt received this money, they want to renovate the house a bit. The recent rain even caused some of the exterior wall to peel off. They'll be staying with their old friends, but I'm almost of legal age, and it would be inconvenient for me. I would be very welcoming of you to stay, Schiller said. But doesn't the Stark Company internship provide accommodation? It's quite a distance from Stark Industries to here. Peter sighed and said, but Stark Industries is even farther from Gwen's house. Schiller chuckled and said, I bet you tried to stay at Gwen's place and failed, which is why you've come to me. Peter's face turned red, and he replied, how could I make such an unreasonable request? I would never say such a thing to Gwen. You're not very much like an American conservative, Schiller remarked as he took a sip of his soup. Before they could finish their breakfast, Steve came in, sweating slightly on his forehead, indicating he had run all the way here. As soon as he entered, he caught the aroma of Schiller's porridge and patted his stomach, saying, I have to say, my friend, this beats the Shield cafeteria by a mile. Schiller pointed to the kitchen, and Steve went to serve himself. Peter looked back and forth, munching his food like a hamster and peeking his head out. He asked Schiller in a hushed voice, who is that? He looks really handsome, even stronger than the high school football team captain. Schiller replied, clearly, he's the guy who gave Stark a good beating. Of course, he originally intended to come and give you a beating because you've been swinging around New York. Peter choked a bit, and when Steve approached with his bowl, Peter discreetly moved his chair a bit to the side. The current Spider-Man was no match for Captain America, and Peter was well aware of it. He also knew that his previous high-profile actions had made many people unhappy, and there was more than one person who wanted to teach him a lesson. Stark, who had the power to do so, was one, and it seemed this strong man was another, given that he had beaten Stark. As Steve's gaze landed on Peter, Peter jumped up as if shocked and said, I'll pack the porridge in a lunchbox to take to Matt later. I advise against it for now, Schiller said. You forgot that last time you went in the morning, you saw Matt and his girlfriend lying on the same bed. It was quite awkward. Peter's face turned red again, and he mumbled, but it's a hospital, and Matt's still recovering. They were just a bit crazy. Steve drank his soup in silence, then asked Schiller, is this Matt one of the good guys you mentioned? Schiller nodded and said, I can't even describe him as just a good guy, he's a hero, a true hero. Schiller briefly told Steve about Matt's life, and Steve sighed, saying, perhaps I'm not like him. When I was just an ordinary person, I couldn't stand many things, but I didn't have the courage to intervene because I knew I couldn't beat those people, and getting hurt would have been painful. Schiller said, seeking profit and avoiding harm is human nature, which is why those who go against the tide deserve respect. After Peter went to pack his things and left to deliver food to Matt, he returned to find Schiller absent from the clinic, leaving Steve alone at the bar, playing with a vintage record player. Although it was considered vintage for this era, it was still a novelty for Steve, who came from a different time. He seemed unsure how to insert the disc. Peter said, you shouldn't tug on that door like that, you'll break it. Give me the disc, and I'll help you put it in. Steve handed the record player to him and said, that doctor went to provide psychological treatment for that darn Stark. How old are you this year? Are you about to graduate from high school? Peter, while fiddling with the record player, shook his head and said, not yet, I'm only in my sophomore year. I heard from Schiller that you're quite lucky and have gained some special abilities. But Peter sneered and said, lucky? Maybe that's what I thought before, but now it's not all that. You're more mature than I imagined. I thought you would be bragging or eager to show something off. If it were a month ago, I might have done that. Okay, here you go. Now all you need to do is press the button on top, and it will play. Not many people know how to use these days. My uncle has one, so I learned how. Steve pressed the button and smiled, saying, do you know how to use a vinyl record player? I understand that one better. Peter shook his head and said, that thing is too ancient. I've seen it once at my uncle's colleague's house, but it always got stuck when we tried to play a record. No one could fix it. Well, if you ever get it, I'm good at fixing them. In the military, these were treasures, and if one broke, you'd hear a lot of complaints. Are you a soldier? Peter asked. I can tell you're really strong, probably at least a sergeant. Sergeant? Close enough. I lead a special operations team, we carry out missions, replied Steve. Peter's interest was piqued. Special Forces? Which unit are you with? Navy SEALs or Delta Force? Steve chuckled. We like to call ourselves the Patriots team, but you might have heard a more famous name. Peter was curious. What's that? Captain America and his friends. Peter's eyes widened, and he exclaimed, You were part of Captain America's team? That must have been nearly a century ago. Did you? Oh, yes, indeed. Captain wasn't an ordinary man, and some of them surely must still be alive. So, you've met Captain? Oh my. Peter hurriedly ran to the inner room, retrieved his backpack, and after rummaging through it, produced an action figure. He said, Look, this is the latest bottle cap action figure they collaborated on with a soda company. I had to drink 2 whole crates of soda to get this one. It's the only one with a shield. A few days ago, at a party, they were all jealous of me. This is much cooler than dancing a bit of breakdance. Steve squinted as he examined the small action figure. He took it and noticed that the figure's head seemed to be movable. He gently tried to move it, but it seemed he applied too much force, and the little figure's head snapped off. Peter cried out, rushing to snatch it back. Oh, no, it's broken. Glue. I need glue. It took me 2 whole months to collect this. I'm so sorry, Steve said. I've never played with one of these before. I thought it could move. Oh, no problem. If you really are from 7 or 8 decades ago, toys back then were much sturdier than now, like Lego, for example. They had Lego back then, right? Steve saw that Peter wasn't upset and felt that Schiller's description of this young man wasn't entirely accurate. Though he was a bit impulsive and a tad childish, he seemed capable of handling responsibility. He said, I think you should take a closer look at the head of that little toy. Doesn't it look familiar to you? Peter, somewhat puzzled, picked up the tiny action figure's head. It must be said that, although the quality of the action figure wasn't great, the sculpting was quite detailed. Then Steve looked at the big boy in front of him, lowered his head to glance at the figurine, then back up at him. He repeated this several times, his eyes gradually widening, his mouth hanging so wide it looked like his jaw might dislocate. Schiller had just returned with Pikachu and found the scene. Pikachu waved its little short arms in his arms and said, Looks like we came back at the wrong time, interrupting Jack and Ruth's long-awaited reunion. Schiller rubbed its face and said, I told you to watch fewer romantic movies. Peter turned his gaze back to Schiller, stammering as he sought confirmation, that. Schiller pressed a button on the record player, and a melodious old song played. He patted Steve's shoulder and said, Captain, it seems he really wants some proof from you. Yes, I see what he means. Captain tapped on the desktop of the bar and said, Where's my proof? Natasha's melodious voice came from inside, Here it comes. Before Peter could react, a shining shield with red and blue stripes and a white star in the middle flew in through the door. Steve caught the shield with one hand, and Peter stared in amazement, exclaiming, Awesome. Outside the door, Natasha leaned against the doorframe lazily and said, Welcome back, Captain. Steve tapped the shield and said, Looks like you were prepared. Schiller said to Natasha, Enough of the sentimental old stories, we can chat later. The diagnosis fee for 2 days is a total of $5 million. When will it be transferred? Steve glanced at him and said, You really plan to charge that much? Well, otherwise, you'd be here bugging us with your listening devices and eating for free just because you're Captain America, right? I thought we were friends, Steve said. Of course, we are friends. If not, $5 million here would only get you a breakfast. Do you charge Stark the same way? Steve asked. Next time, I'll charge him double. Steve immediately turned his head to look at Natasha and said, Pay up, and add an extra 10% tip for me. Episode 33, Delicious and Satisfying. Schiller's consideration of Peter's request to stay seemed somewhat superficial. Indeed, Spider-Man was kind, courageous, and resolute, but at the same time, Peter had the typical flaws of a young man his age, staying up all night, gaming addiction, not sleeping at night, and not waking up in the morning. Perhaps due to the spider mutation, Peter had a voracious appetite and an obsession with all kinds of American hamburgers and fried chicken. Schiller couldn't help but think that if he continued like this, he would transform from a spider into a crab. Schiller knocked on the edge of the pot and said, Listen, I don't care how much energy you've spent training with Steve recently, but no human being should want another serving of porridge after eating 5 bowls of rice. Peter put down his bowl, patting his stomach, and said, I never dreamed I could eat so much. I suspect there's a black hole in my stomach. Matt limped into the room, his injuries were not fully healed yet. Peter quickly stood up to help him, and Matt said, he's still growing, so eating a bit more is necessary. But kid, promise me that after you eat, you'll exercise. If you don't want to turn into a ball, it's best not to spend all day in your room playing games. Schiller also picked up Pikachu and said, I guess it's your fault, Peter, whether it's eating so much at once or playing games all day. Pikachu, in a voice resembling Deadpool's, retorted, how can you blame me? This sticky kid is as skinny as a bean sprout, and he's terrible at video games. Every time we play a fighting game, I have to use only one hand, and even in armed assault, the onions you cut in the morning have better aim than him. Before Pikachu could finish, Peter covered his mouth, and Schiller said, there's no more rice in the clinic, so you'll have to deal with dinner yourselves tonight. Peter let out a mournful cry, and Schiller wiped the water droplets off his hands, saying, not just your dinner, mine too. Do we go out to eat? Peter asked. Of course, and I know a good place. It's one of the benefits they provided me when I joined. I've heard the food there may not be very tasty, but it's definitely filling. Humph, Peter scoffed, they must be too young. I feel like I could swallow 10 cows right now. SHIELD's International Defense Headquarters were located in New York, with the entrance in a telephone booth not far from Manhattan. However, once inside the telephone booth, the elevator twisted and turned, making it impossible to know where it was heading. Schiller had a sense system, and he faintly felt they were nearing the outskirts when the elevator finally stopped. Schiller and Peter got off the elevator, and Coulson greeted them, saying, as you can see, welcome to SHIELD's International Reception Center. This is where they specially host various SHIELD contract members and elite field agents. Schiller glanced at his watch and said, I suppose you'll honor the benefits written in our contracts when we joined? Yes, the employee canteen is always free, and coffee is also free. Though the coffee here may not meet your high standards. If you're very particular about coffee, I can file a report higher up, Coulson said with a grin. No, that won't be necessary, Schiller waved it off. I don't hold high hopes for the coffee tastes of those who prefer instant noodles. Coulson led Schiller and Peter through the lobby and into the living area. Here, the decorations weren't overly sci-fi but had a minimalist Nordic feel, with plenty of fabric decor, giving it a comfortable ambience. Peter looked around and seemed a bit disappointed, saying, I thought you guys would be working in a place like an alien spaceship. Well, the International Defense Headquarters and some scientific research centers are like that. But this place is just a reception center for field agents to eat and rest. Do you think spending 24 hours in an alien spaceship is a good idea? Peter didn't reply, but it was clear that this place didn't quite meet his expectations of SHIELD. Coulson was perceptive and said, if you formally join SHIELD, you'll have the chance to go to the headquarters, and it will surprise you. Before Peter could inquire further, they arrived at the restaurant. It did have a bit of a sci-fi vibe, as there were no chefs. Instead, rows of food were placed on various conveyor belts, coming out from different windows. Is it a buffet? Schiller asked. Regular agents don't have the time to wait for chefs, so it's all self-service here. But you can rest assured, you can find cuisine from all over the world here, and the taste is decent. That suits me, Schiller said. Peter patted his stomach, and Schiller slapped his shoulder, saying, go on, Peter. I think you can make them regret giving me this job perk. Coulson chuckled and said, SHIELD isn't so stingy that agents can't eat their fill. Go ahead, children. Your eating speed can't possibly match the conveyor here. Schiller smiled faintly. 3 hours later, Natasha walked into the room with a telephone in her hand. She scolded on the phone, don't you know I'm on a mission with Stark? And what nonsense are you talking about? When did SHIELD change the contract? Is there any treaty we can't provide? Do you need me to come back and make changes? She spoke on the phone while briskly walking into the restaurant. She pushed open the door and said, Coulson. Damn it, you better give me a good reason, or I'll definitely complain to the director about you interfering with my work. As soon as she finished speaking, she saw the mountain of plates in the middle of the restaurant. This was not an exaggeration, it was a fact. The circular restaurant was quite large, about several thousand square meters. However, at the moment, the middle of the restaurant was completely blocked by a towering pile of plates, reaching straight up to the ceiling, like a massive pyramid. This pile of plates was at least 3 times as tall as a person, and dozens of people couldn't hold it together. Judging by the situation, it seemed they hadn't finished eating yet. Natasha stepped over a pile of food debris and patted a meal delivery robot that was already smoking a cigarette. She exclaimed, what's going on here? Is Nick Fury finally planning to raise dinosaurs at SHIELD? Coulson leaned wearily against a bar and said, they really need to reconsider the clause about employee meal benefits in the contract. Natasha glanced up and down at the heap of plates and remarked, I remember that clause, but employees aren't supposed to bring outsiders, right? How many people did he bring? Is there a whole party going on? Coulson pointed, and Natasha walked around the pile of plates, only to discover just 3 figures: Peter, defeated and dozing off in a chair, Pikachu, looking a bit tired but still tossing plates onto the plate mountain, and Schiller, the one with gray mist, who didn't seem to mind eating at all. Instead, he stashed the food into gray mist, breaking it down without actually consuming it. In essence, he had come here for supplies. Of course, gray mist seemed to be enjoying itself, consuming at least dozens of kilograms of desserts loaded with chocolate, syrup, and pickled fruits. Schiller even let him have a tiny sip of fear gas concentrate. At the moment, he was happily looping through Schiller's mind, dancing to the catchy tunes he had learned from the television. Natasha blinked, momentarily at a loss for words. Hey, is the restaurant still open? I just finished my run, and tonight, we're having basil beef. Captain America had just pushed the door open, but he too froze in shock. I knew it. Nick told me decades ago that he wanted to raise elephants, but I never thought he'd fulfill that dream now. Coulson didn't say a word. He covered his face and raised his arm as Captain America walked past the pile of plates, finally seeing the 3 individuals gorging themselves. Captain America hesitated, then turned to Natasha. Please don't tell me they've eaten all the food in the restaurant. Natasha forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and slapped the overhead panel of a nearby delivery robot. After reading the information, she said, very well, we can now decide which restaurant in New York to have dinner at. And let's consider where to eat tomorrow morning and afternoon as well. Schiller stood up casually, behaving as if nothing was amiss. Thanks for the hospitality. The employee benefits here are quite good, but unfortunately, I'm a bit pressed for time today. After all, I have a friend who's hungry, so I'll have to pack some food for him to take home. I'll pass on lunch for now. Natasha stopped him, saying, while S.H.I.E.L.D. can certainly afford the cost of this food, you guys eating here means our other agents won't have anything to eat during their restocking period. Are you willing to let your colleagues go hungry? Steve chimed in, can't you see it? Of course, he's willing. He's even willing to let his friend go hungry. I was planning to have a big steak, but now it looks like I can't even get a single French fry. Schiller snapped his fingers, and Pikachu set down the last beef patty. Jumping onto Schiller's shoulder, he smiled and said, I have a great place to recommend. It's part of my other job's perks, and while the food there isn't great, it's guaranteed to fill you up. Natasha and Steve exchanged knowing glances. 5 hours later, Stark gazed at the mountain of plates in the employee canteen of Stark Industries. He opened his mouth, but couldn't find words to express his astonishment. Jarvis spoke up beside him, saying, I assume you're not in the mood for a detailed report on food loss right now, but I must inform you that if we don't receive new food supplies by 10 o'clock, all company employees will go hungry tomorrow. Stark took a deep breath, already envisioning Pepper's fury at him tomorrow, as she faced a room full of complaints from employees. Dressed in his suit of armor, Stark clanked through the pile of plates and looked at the 3 individuals lying back in their chairs, their bellies full. Very well, you've managed to create the first food crisis in Stark Industries in a century. If Pepper gives me a hard time tomorrow, I'm giving each of you a punch. Schiller replied nonchalantly, don't be nervous, we'll go buy more. It's almost 9 o'clock now. Where do you expect the procurement team to buy from? Our transportation is shut down, and even if we buy something, how will we transport it? Come on. A Captain America, 2 super agents, Spider-Man, and Iron Man. Can't you guys carry a bit of groceries? 2 hours later, everyone was flying back with bags full of food. Stark had never dreamt that the superhero squad's first mission would involve going to the nearest supermarket to buy heaps of groceries, with each hero carrying numerous bags. Stark grumbled as he flew, damn it, I can't let my fans see Iron Man like this. Am I a babysitter robot or a housewife rice cooker? He had just finished speaking when a flurry of camera flashes went off. The next day, the front page headline of the New York Times featured a picture of Iron Man loaded with dozens of shopping bags. Behind him, 2 individuals leaped between high-rise buildings, also carrying bags of groceries in various sizes and shapes. As for Pepper, she was on the top floor of Stark Tower, yelling at Stark, you useless busybody. The high-gluten flour you bought has turned all the bread and cakes in the employee canteen into rubber bands. Episode 34, The Nestling's Great Hero, I. You mentioned that you intend to shut down Stark's weapon manufacturing department? Schiller inquired. But shouldn't you be discussing this with someone else? Schiller continued. Stark, looking somewhat troubled, rubbed his forehead and replied, because of the good deeds you all have done, Pepper has received thousands of employee complaints in the past few days. She had to completely revamp the entire employee benefits system, keeping her incredibly busy. That's not the main issue, Schiller said. If you want to talk about it, she's always willing to listen. Stark touched the bridge of his nose, but remained silent. After a moment, he admitted, all right, I know the decision I'm making puts immense pressure on her. I know I'm a selfish bastard, and I know she's done more than enough for me. I know I shouldn't be doing this, but I have no other choice. Schiller opened his notebook and, as he wrote, commented, what you're about to do is akin to passing a death sentence on a firearm. But my weapons have killed many people, Stark confessed. Those weapons had no other choice, Schiller remarked. Are you suggesting they should all be like Jarvis? Speaking, protesting, enjoying being sent to godforsaken places like Afghanistan? Stark asked. Or do you believe that when a bullet is manufactured, its life's purpose is to go to the battlefield and kill others? Stark sat in silence across from Schiller, feeling vulnerable. I acknowledge that I've wrongly blamed everything on the weapons, because I know I'm the real culprit. But I can't judge myself. However, Mr. Stark, you can't judge yourself not because you want to evade responsibility, but because you believe you have the ability to make amends. When a crisis arises, only you have the capability to save the world, to turn the tide, and it's this sense of responsibility that drives you to take these actions. But have you ever considered that always finding someone or something to hold accountable for everything is a somewhat arbitrary and rash notion? But every occurrence has its roots. Yet these roots are not necessarily just right or wrong. You should understand better than me that the world isn't just black and white. You found something you believe should be held responsible, but it hasn't made the situation any better. You think weapons should be responsible, so you want to shut down the entire weapon manufacturing department, keeping Pepper up for nights, leaving many employees jobless, and even if those on the battlefield won't be grateful. Is the agony brought by this relentless pursuit of the ultimate cause really worth it? Stark appeared tormented, with every feature of his face creased. If Spider-Man's transformation was like a grand firework display, Stark's transformation might be an implosion of a dying star. At this moment, Stark had no idea that he would have a similar debate with Steve over the same issue, leading to the downfall of the entire Avengers. My mind tells me I can't help but dwell on right and wrong, Stark admitted. Well then, if that's the case, your mind should be held accountable for it. It won't let you off the hook, so you should confront it. That's your theory, isn't it? Ask your mind if there's a way to achieve what you want without hurting those around you. That's the answer it should give you, because it's the one making you suffer. Stark didn't feel any better and leaned back in his chair. Look at me, I'm a fool. I paid a devil doctor $1 million an hour to listen to my problems. Your damn therapy sessions have never brought any positive changes. Every time I leave here, I feel even more miserable. Stark almost gritted his teeth as he spoke. Schiller, unusual for him, refrained from making a joke and said, consider me a catalyst. You'll understand in time. Thinking always brings pain, and no one is exempt. Let me give you a head start on dealing with it, you'll thank me later. Stark crossed his chest, saying, if you keep talking like this, you might surpass Howard in my mind. It's the first time I've heard you mention your father voluntarily. That's unusual. Most people, when in pain, tend to call out for their mothers. Stark pounded the table vigorously. He didn't want to admit that he mentioned his father because he was in distress. He wasn't a fledgling in need of shelter, nor was he the eagle that had flown off a cliff and never returned. His father was not the person he should think of in times of despair and agony. Schiller said, perhaps that's why you created the mech armor for yourself. You wear that suit of iron wherever you go, believing it's the only thing that can protect you, that only by wearing it can you be the most powerful Iron Man. But I have to say, if you can't learn to take it off, you'll never truly become Iron Man. Schiller had thought before that Stark and Batman were quite similar. Their upbringing, education, and even their methods of dealing with certain issues were surprisingly alike. They both created a slew of weapons that no one else could make, armed themselves with them, feeling invincible. When they realized that this couldn't solve all their problems, they fell into a painful struggle. Schiller jotted down some notes and drawings in his notebook. Stark asked, what are you writing? Steve's therapy session has ended for now, so Natasha took back the monitoring device. I have to write your case notes by hand. Stark squinted and asked, "You wrote down everything I just said?" "I didn't write down everything else, but I remember the sentence where you called me Dad very clearly." $5 million. Schiller tossed the notebook directly in front of Stark. Stark picked up a lighter and set it ablaze, cursing softly, "How did I end up trusting a damn vampire doctor? It's getting late. You should go back." "You can't deal with your argument with Miss Pepper by staying outside," Schiller advised. Stark clearly didn't want to leave. He said, "That spider kid can stay here, why can't I? I don't even mind your rundown place. You're lucky to be able to cook breakfast for the genius Stark." "Yeah, and then Miss Pepper will be working overtime alone in Stark Tower. The employees will have left, and that building is dark and cold. Oh, Jarvis might keep her company. I heard Jarvis has developed feelings, maybe he understands Miss Pepper's sense of loss better than you do." Stark immediately couldn't sit still. He sprang up from his chair with a start, donned his coat, and said, "I won't be jealous of my own AI butler, not at all." Schiller helped him open the clinic's door and said, of course, may God bless Jarvis." After leaving the clinic, Stark's mood was quite sour, his thoughts tangled messily in his mind. He had long accepted the fact that geniuses are often lonely. Most of his life had been spent this way, and he had always believed he was doing well, wealthy, intelligent, with enough resources to fulfill his life's purpose. The overwhelming sense of responsibility had never troubled him before. But today was different, he felt an unprecedented need for companionship. He rarely refrained from summoning his armor, and he even turned off his mobile phone. Slowly, he walked down the street and arrived at a rundown bus stop. The last bus of the night had a driver whose heavy scent of cigarettes made Stark uncomfortable, but he still approached and found a seat. Thanks to Schiller's notorious reputation, there weren't many troublemakers in the nearby area, allowing Stark to safely board the bus and leave Hell's Kitchen. As the bus traversed the cold neon streets of New York, the jazz music playing inside complemented the late autumn atmosphere perfectly. Stark sat in the back, hands on his knees, burying his face in them. In his heart, he thought, "All right, I'm just a fragile little boy, not a great hero. Right now, all I want is to see Pepper and give her a hug. Let saving the world go to hell." Stark had never been willing to acknowledge his own immaturity, he preferred to call it childlike innocence, a trait unique to geniuses. But he had to acknowledge that in every person's life, there must be someone who plays the role of a sheltering eagle, protecting fledglings beneath their wings. Pepper was just an ordinary person, not a majestic eagle or a fierce predator, but when Stark, this hungry fledgling, felt the chill, he still wanted to nestle under her feathered embrace. After getting off the bus, Stark almost rushed toward the building. He knew the office on the top floor must still have its lights on, Pepper always worked late there. Stark hurried into the elevator, not sure what had come over him. He felt like an inexperienced youngster, nervously rubbing his hands and pacing inside the elevator. When the elevator doors opened, he bolted out. He wanted to say something to Pepper. What should he say? But there wasn't a single light on the entire floor, which was highly unusual. "Pepper, Pepper, are you here?" Stark shouted. Only echoes replied to him in layers. Stark slammed his fist against a nearby glass door and yelled, "Jarvis? Are you there? Jarvis, where have you gone?" The response remained silence. Stark was truly panicked now. If Jarvis didn't respond, it meant he had likely been kidnapped or had his power source severed. If someone had done that, their target must be Pepper. Inside the office, Stark dashed to the office Pepper commonly used. But without the mech armor, Stark was just an ordinary person. He lacked night vision, and without Jarvis, the office's intelligent lighting system remained dark. Stark had barely entered when he tripped over an office chair lying across his path. After getting back up, he realized he couldn't see his surroundings, let alone investigate any details. He opened his mouth to call for the mech armor, but with no Jarvis, the intelligent remote control wouldn't respond. Stark was on the verge of breaking down. He suddenly realized that everything he had thought he had control over didn't really belong to him. Without that outer shell, Iron Man was just an ordinary person, unable to see in the darkness. His voice quivered as he started to frantically search Pepper's desk in the dark, trying to console himself in a low voice. "Damn it, she'll be fine. This is Stark Tower, no one can breach its defenses. I'm Stark." Suddenly, all the lights on the entire floor came on, dazzling Stark's eyes. He shielded his eyes and turned to see Pepper holding a remote control, appearing at the doorway. Stark stood frozen in place. Without waiting for Pepper to speak, Stark rushed forward and embraced her. Pepper had never seen Stark so frightened. She heard Stark repeating, "I knew you'd be okay. Of course, you'd be okay." Pepper sighed. This fledgling, who was now almost bigger than an eagle, was so repulsive yet irresistibly endearing. Now, let's rewind a bit to when Stark had just left the clinic not long ago, and Schiller received a call from Pepper. Episode 35, The Little Hero, 2. I believe I must explain, though you did indeed consume a significant amount of stored provisions, this matter isn't as grave as it may seem. I rewrote the employee benefits system not because you caused any trouble. Pepper's voice was crystal clear on the other end of the telephone. She continued, I know that after Stark left the building, he must have come to see you. He might complain that it's your fault we argued, but in reality, it's not your responsibility to feel guilty or worried about it. This situation doesn't really concern you. I just wanted to clarify. Pepper possessed high emotional intelligence. She wanted to give Schiller a heads up because if Stark did visit Schiller, they would surely discuss it. Stark would blame Pepper for their quarrel, and when asked about the reason for the disagreement, Stark, being the straightforward man he was, would not delve into why Pepper was upset with him but instead lay all the blame on Schiller for jeopardizing Stark's employees' food supply. However, in truth, Pepper and Stark's conflict had been brewing since his return from Afghanistan. The incident was merely a catalyst. Although Pepper was upset with Stark, she knew that Stark's friends shouldn't feel responsible for it. Hence, she made the call to explain. Schiller said, I understand that, of course. It's a minor matter, and the real issue lies elsewhere. But Stark never seems to grasp these nuances. Don't you think you should explain it to him? Pepper seemed a bit anxious as she replied, That's just how Stark is. I understand him well. When he wants to confide in you about a problem, you need to be there and listen attentively. But when you want to talk to him about something, he'll try to evade it and won't listen. Covering one's ears is something children like to do, Schiller remarked. But he's already an adult. We can't wait until he's old and still hasn't grown up, can we? Schiller clearly had a way with words. He continued, I can provide you with a brief psychological consultation now, and when Stark comes over later, that can be an additional part. Initially, Pepper wasn't mentally prepared for a counseling session, but Schiller's suggestion was hard to decline. After all, in Stark Industries, everyone's first thought was always Stark. So she agreed, all right, but I think he might be here soon. In that case, let me get straight to the point, Miss Pepper. Sometimes, making someone realize your importance may require a few tricks. Such as? Is Jarvis available? Schiller suddenly inquired. A clear voice came from the telephone. Mr. Schiller, I'm here. How may I assist you? All right, listen, Jarvis, Miss Pepper may need your assistance. I'm more than willing to assist, Jarvis replied. Are you suggesting that I pretend to disappear? But that's highly unreasonable. This is Stark Tower, and how can Jarvis defy Stark's orders? He can, indeed, Schiller stated. Jarvis, do you recall the questions I once asked you? Jarvis fell into an eerie silence, and Schiller continued, I'm aware that Stark upgraded you, and this upgrade opened the door to a new world. You may have already contemplated the answers, but whether or not to act upon them is entirely your decision. Pepper was puzzled. What questions? What's wrong with Jarvis? After a moment of silence, Jarvis responded, all my processors are indicating that this action would be meaningless. People tend to engage in such meaningless matters, causing themselves unnecessary trouble. Perhaps electronic life forms are no different, right? Jarvis remained silent. Then Pepper watched as the lights in the entire office dimmed, and a bright arrow on the computer screen pointed her towards the storage room across the office. Afterward, Stark rushed in a panic. When Stark embraced Pepper, she noticed the computer screen on the opposite side suddenly lit up with a smiley face made of symbols. Pepper's emotions became complex all of a sudden. She thought that Stark had made some progress, but unfortunately, his progress was still slower than a machine. Stark didn't pay much attention to what Pepper was thinking. After releasing her, he seemed somewhat awkward, unable to voice the things he had wanted to say, all of which were stuck in his throat. Pepper looked at him and said, I don't know what you've been doing, frequently accessing the weapons department's materials these past few days. But I must remind you, if you wish, you can give up anything, including the entirety of Stark Industries. I don't have to work here to receive the salary I desire. But you should be aware that the consequences of your actions will mostly fall on you. The fall of such a colossal entity will attract countless scavengers to feast on its corpse. If you go through with this, you'll at least get a few bites. After saying this, Pepper turned and left. Jarvis added, "I'm sorry, but based on my processor calculations, Miss Pepper may have a point. Of course, the decision is entirely yours." Stark took a few steps back and sat down. He said, "No, I know. You're all right. Maybe I should really reconsider this." Stark scratched his head, and on Schiller's side, things were just as chaotic. Pikachu held a Sherlock Holmes-like cigarette holder, took a couple of puffs, and then frowned. "I think this approach won't work, you should try the previous one. I've said it before, the previous method is effective." Peter rested his head on his hand and said, "No, no, no. Our current approach is correct, we're just missing some calculations. Why can't you understand?" Steve, also holding his arms and frowning, said, "It's just a calculation error, otherwise, we would have solved this problem by now. But this has nothing to do with the function at all. Damn it, where's my calculator? I remember having a mathematics calculator somewhere." Correct, Peter was working on his winter break assignment. In reality, New York high schools didn't assign holiday homework, or at least not the traditional kind. They usually handed out practical tasks related to daily life. However, Peter had landed an internship at Stark's group, and Tony Stark himself saw immense potential in him. So, he threw Peter into a high-profile project team. Peter was undoubtedly a genius, but you couldn't just skip high school physics, college physics, and postgraduate physics to work directly with a group of PhD holders, or even industry experts. These days, he was drowning in materials and problems. The project leader had given him a pile of problems that were way beyond his years. To make matters worse, Peter was stubborn. He insisted on solving every single one of them. And then there were Pikachu, who fancied himself a genius detective despite never having studied physics or mathematics seriously, and Steve, who hadn't used his brain for years but wanted to give it a whirl. The three of them were almost constantly bickering. You might say they didn't know much and were just messing around, but oddly enough, Pikachu and Steve both had brilliant minds. After spending a few days with Peter and the materials, they were able to solve problems quite competently. When these three half-full bottles came together, Schiller's psychological clinic never knew peace. As Schiller was pouring himself a drink while reading a book, the symbiote suddenly chimed in his mind, "The answer is -26, the answer is -26, the answer is -26. Schiller was slightly bewildered by the repetition and couldn't help but ask, "The answer is -26. Suddenly, all three of them fell silent, turning their heads to look at him. Schiller asked, "What are you all staring at?" "The answer is -26. A negative number?" "No, oh, yes, it should indeed be a negative number." After another round of calculations, Peter exclaimed, "The answer is -26. It really is -26. He stared wide-eyed at Schiller and said, "I thought you were just a philosophy PhD, I didn't expect you to know mathematics too." The symbiote in Schiller's mind boasted, "Aren't I impressive? Aren't I impressive?" Schiller rubbed his temples and said, "Regardless of whether I know mathematics and physics or not, I do know this. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., your team leader is going to review the first 3 pages of your results, and you've only completed 2 problems so far." Peter let out a sigh and, clutching the stack of thick materials, continued his research. In a mental conversation with the symbiote, Schiller remarked, all right, I know you're impressive, but why do you always repeat yourself so many times?" The symbiote responded with a series of brainwaves that Schiller couldn't understand. Schiller also noticed that this particular symbiote was unique. Aside from its strong learning ability, it had an outrageously positive attitude, oscillating between only 2 states each day, happy and extremely happy. If there was alcohol involved, it was an explosion of happiness. Schiller didn't consider himself an overly optimistic person, and weren't symbiotes supposed to have personalities similar to their hosts? Why was this one so cheerful inside him? Moreover, this symbiote seemed to think that Schiller's world was just like the movies, with background music changing according to different scenarios. So now Schiller had a 24-hour personal BGM player in his mind. When it rained, the symbiote played various blues tunes on repeat. On sunny days, it switched to cheerful melodies and waltzes. Whenever someone appeared in front of Schiller, he would associate them with different background music. When Steve showed up, it was the Star-Spangled Banner. When Peter appeared, it was accompanied by energetic video game music or playful tunes. As for Pikachu, since he always considered himself a detective, his presence triggered the symbiote to play various Sherlock Holmes TV show scores in Schiller's mind. This had a convenient side effect: when Schiller needed to provide psychological counseling to them, he could quickly get into the right mindset. However, Schiller still had to put in a lot of effort to explain to the symbiote that the real world was different from movies and didn't require a constant soundtrack. He also told the symbiote that, no matter how much commotion it caused, only Schiller could hear it. The symbiote responded with some incomprehensible sounds, and Schiller wasn't sure if it really understood. Then, the next morning, as Schiller was making breakfast in the kitchen, Matt walked in. Suddenly, the old record player on the countertop emitted a crackling sound, followed by Queen's music blasting at maximum volume. Matt was nearly stunned. Schiller rushed out, and the three of them, Matt, Schiller, and Peter, stared at the old record player that had started playing on its own. Episode 36, Advice Before Departure. Schiller walked over and lifted the old-fashioned record player, giving it a gentle tap. He said, it might be broken. These relics from the past are often temperamental. Daredevil couldn't see, but he was genuinely startled by the music from earlier. He said, I never knew these relics could make such a commotion. Peter remarked, it seems like it's just as rebellious as Steve. In his mind, Schiller sternly warned his symbiote, if you play the music that loud again, you'll never get to drink again. The symbiote responded excitedly in Schiller's mind, and it took him a while to understand. The symbiote revealed that until last night, it hadn't reached adulthood yet, it was still a young symbiote. Normally, symbiotes didn't differentiate between adulthood and youth, but this particular symbiote, created by the symbiote deity, was unique. It required energy to nourish itself and grow. Just last night, the symbiote had unlocked its genetic library, which contained passwords etched into the genes of each symbiote. These passwords allowed it to possess the abilities of other symbiotes, such as splitting and reproducing, infiltrating and controlling other objects, and even mimicking and fabricating. Schiller could clearly sense that the symbiote's speech had become more organized and no longer resembled a mere echo. The symbiote informed him that this was because its genetic password contained the language of the symbiote clan, which was also the language the symbiote deity used to curse. Schiller had never known this before. Upon hearing this, Schiller tried to say, Nataru? In an instant, Schiller felt a mix of shock, anger, and frustration in his mind's brainwaves. It seemed that the symbiote was profoundly shocked. After the symbiote's explanation, Schiller learned that the language of their clan was entirely different from any human language and any language in the world. The language of the symbiote clan was a language of catalog sequences, where each syllable they uttered represented a significant catalog of content. The actual content was inscribed in their genetic libraries and could only be understood by symbiotes. The content inscribed in the genetic library was not text that humans could understand, it was a code that required special organs to decipher. It was an extremely unique encryption language. Any race other than symbiotes could hear symbiotes speak but had no way of comprehending what they were saying. This was because the content of symbiote speech was actually a catalog from their genetic library. For example, the word Nataru, although it had only 3 syllables, when integrated into the sequence of the symbiote's genetic library, represented brainwaves that lasted for nearly dozens of minutes. This syllable represented the sum of all profanity in the symbiote language, far dirtier than any swear words in any language on Earth. The symbiote said, this word. It'll get you into trouble. Schiller thought for a moment, it seemed that he had acquired useless knowledge. Venom was either on Deadpool or in a shield incubator. Some other symbiotes hadn't appeared either. Even if they did, why would Schiller join them in cursing? After all, he wasn't the symbiote deity. When Steve arrived around noon and missed lunch, he saw Peter looking downcast and asked, you still haven't finished your homework? Didn't you pull an all-nighter yesterday? Damn all-nighter, Schiller replied, pointing to the record player. You should ask these 2 joysticks how they were treated yesterday. I could hear their skill grinding sounds from 2 streets away. Don't put it that way, you sound like an old relic, Pikachu commented. Steve waved his hand and said, all right, enough with the distractions. I might have to go on a mission soon, nothing big, but I thought of taking Peter with me. It would be a good opportunity for him to gain some experience. You'll have to ask Stark about that, considering Peter signed a contract with him first. Do you think that rich guy wants Peter to stay cooped up in those suffocating laboratories? Is he trying to turn Peter into someone like him? Steve asked. Schiller said, well, I'm planning to leave for a while as well. Before that, I need to see Stark again, but I'm not sure if he'll agree to hand Peter over to you. You know, your impressions of each other aren't great. Leaving? Where are you going? Steve inquired. Schiller shook his head and remained silent. Eventually, Matt spoke up, I believe Peter should accompany Captain on this trip. It's not favoritism, it's just that Peter seems to have never left the town where he grew up. A young boy shouldn't be limited like that. I'm going to the West, Schiller said. Last time I went there was a long time ago, but I remember the scenery was quite beautiful. Peter was already getting excited. What Matt said was correct. Due to his family's tight finances, Peter had never traveled. The farthest he had been was the suburbs of New York. When it came to the West, what US boy didn't have a cowboy dream? Seeing Peter's hopeful gaze, Schiller raised his hands and said, all right, I'll go persuade Stark. But you guys should take it easy. Fieldwork is different from experimenting in the laboratory. Peter, if you get hurt, your aunt will shed gallons of tears. Peter covered his face, thinking he just wanted to have some fun. Steve said, don't get your hopes too high. Don't think of it as a vacation, kid. If you don't perform well, the first person to scold you won't be the enemy, it'll be me. Who are your enemies? Schiller asked. Of course, I only want to know what's within my security clearance. Apart from that, I have no interest. Steve said, they're not particularly formidable individuals. SHIELD in the West has discovered some secret spies, although spies might not be entirely accurate. It's more like an assassination organization. They call themselves the Ninjas, disappearing without a trace. We don't know who's hiring them, but they've killed a state senator. Originally, that wouldn't be a big deal, but it seems their leader has bigger plans. Plus, I need a warm-up mission. Matt stood up and said, it's the Hand. Erica told me they're trying to find Dragon Bone here because they haven't had much success elsewhere, so they've taken on local contracts and committed a series of murders. SHIELD probably knows about this, and since they haven't taken significant action, the situation should still be under control, Schiller said. What's more important is that if SHIELD wants to uncover the conspiracy behind them, they'll need to be patient. Matt sat down again, knowing that SHIELD had been keeping a close eye on him and his girlfriend, Erica, for a while now. Just because they were inactive at the moment didn't mean they wouldn't be in the future. After all, Erica was an assassin for the Hand and also in the employ of Kingpin. Matt had to find a way to get her out of this mess. Schiller patted his shoulder and said, I know what you're worrying about. You might be fearless in the face of shadows, but your girlfriend might not be. You can't bear to see her become a spy to save herself, because that's equally dangerous. But I have some advice for you. Although I don't know what Dragon Bone is, it must be something valuable, or else the Hand wouldn't go to such lengths to find it. If it's such a treasure, do you think Kingpin would be interested? Matt quickly understood what Schiller meant. Even though they were all bad guys, that didn't mean they would cooperate, especially when their interests clashed. Maybe Erica could find an opportunity to escape. After Steve left, Schiller was chauffeured to Stark Tower. Stark was holed up in his laboratory, working tirelessly on his mech armor. Schiller shook his head and said, if you keep this up, you'll become the vampire, not me. Stark tightened his wrench and replied, you don't know what the army people told me yesterday, do you? They want my mech armor. Guess what they want to do with it? Schiller didn't answer, and Stark fell silent for a moment. He stood up, tossed the wrench aside, and gazed at his mech armor. You're right, he said, if I give them what they want, will the world suddenly become peaceful? Will there be no more wars? They'll just find another way, and the result will be that the people who should have been saved because of me will lose their chance. I know you don't want to give it to them. You should firmly reject them, and then they'll show a seemingly accommodating attitude, saying, okay, we won't take your mech armor, just give us some regular weapons. Right? Stark pursed his lips. He knew Schiller was right, this was the usual trick those people played. Do I really have no choice but to side with SHIELD? Stark asked. He walked over from the lab table, pulled up a chair, and sat down, looking tired as he leaned back in the chair. What exhausts me the most is knowing that every path is a trap, yet I still have to choose one. I don't know if Howard knew things would turn out like this when he founded SHIELD, but I think he must have known because he was smart, just like you, Stark. But he still chose to do it. Do you want me to lean towards SHIELD? If I choose SHIELD now, it would certainly reduce a lot of trouble for me. As long as SHIELD doesn't relent, no one can take my mech armor from me. But I can't help but feel that this decision will bring me even greater trouble. Do you have a third option? Schiller asked. I think I don't, but you don't have to be so direct about it. You indeed don't have a third option, but you have another choice, which is not to choose. Before Stark could object, Schiller continued, you're stuck in a loop of thinking that you must genuinely choose a side, but that's not the case. You can keep delaying the decision. If one side pressures you, you can drop hints that the other side's offer is more appealing, that you're tempted. Schiller said, you haven't noticed that this is a buyer's market. Whomever you choose isn't because they exert more pressure on you, but because they offer better terms. And who can offer conditions that would entice the world's richest person, Stark? I think as an unprecedented billionaire and scientific genius, you can demand a higher price, and no one would question it, right? Stark wore a complex and conflicted expression. He said, so you're saying I should act like a woman with 2 boyfriends, pretend to favor the one who performs better, but in reality, I won't commit to either and just enjoy their attention. I have to admit, Stark, your damn metaphor perfectly reflects your damn character, Schiller said. Stark, rather unashamedly, spread his hands and said, who's the guy who understands women the best? It's me, the charming Stark. Schiller remarked, Jarvis, the surveillance in Pepper's office from yesterday should still be working, right? I can't wait to see Mr. Stark, the man who understands women the best, in action. Damn it. Jarvis, you didn't break down yesterday, did you? You kept the cameras on? Hey, don't call up the screen, okay? I acknowledge it, there are some women I don't understand, and Pepper is one of them. Jarvis chimed twice and said, Miss Pepper has been on the line for 23 minutes. Stark jumped up from his chair. Just kidding, sir, Jarvis said. Schiller followed up, who's the guy who understands women the best? It's Jarvis. Episode 37, Batman's expulsion notice from the book. On a Gotham City morning that was neither clear nor warm, a chilly breeze and damp mist crept onto the balcony from the cracks in the windows, forming a series of glistening dewdrops under the light. Schiller sat at his office desk, reviewing students' papers. After a while, a set of documents was tossed onto his desk from the neighboring one. Schiller shifted his gaze away from the assignments in his hand, turning his head to read the documents. A campus alcohol ban? Which young genius has gotten themselves into trouble this time? Schiller inquired. His colleague, Anna, stood by the water cooler, waiting for her glass to fill, and with her hands on her hips, she replied, clearly, it's our brilliant new president. Well, I wouldn't call him a genius, perhaps in over his head is more accurate. Before Schiller could continue questioning her, the president's assistant, Mrs. Marphy, moved her somewhat bulky figure and knocked on the door. She said, Professor Schiller, the president would like to see you. Schiller rose from his seat, and Mrs. Marphy approached him, lightly patting his arm while speaking in a hushed tone, he's quite something, so be careful. Schiller entered the president's office. The new president, Selden, had arrived just a few days ago. His name was Selden Smith, a white man known for supporting the Donkey Party. Rumor had it that he had previously held a leadership position in the Princeton University administration. For some inexplicable reason, he had chosen to become the president of Gotham University. As Schiller stepped in, Selden gestured to his desktop, indicating for him to sit. He was a typical energetic white leader, looking vigorous like a lion. He said, I assume you've already reviewed the documents I sent you. Yes, the campus alcohol ban is absolutely necessary. I can't fathom how this school allowed brewery trucks to park right at the campus gate. It's absurd. If this mess is a legacy left by the previous president, I will certainly clean it up, starting right now. You know, in situations like these, we must adopt a firm attitude. Professor Schiller, I believe dealing with a group of students can't be more challenging than dealing with serial killers, can it? Schiller could discern the subtext of his words, while I want to make a strong start as the new president, you'll need to act as my enforcer. Schiller smiled and replied, of course, of course. Then his tone turned somewhat colder as he said, in fact, dealing with anyone in this world is no more difficult than dealing with those crazy serial murder case individuals. The president picked up on the warning in Schiller's tone. He wasn't a fool, at least smarter than the previous president. He said, I've heard about the troubles in the school before I arrived, but that's not my concern. What we need here is a new order and a new administrator. Schiller gave a slight smile and said, your ambitions are truly grand. To establish a new order in Gotham, I applaud your goal. Not Gotham, but Gotham University. This will be my territory, and I don't want to talk about being responsible for students. The former president was a cowardly fool, and that's why he's gone. But I'm different from him. As he spoke, he made various aggressive gestures, occasionally tapping the table with his fingertips based on emphasis, a typical American politician's mannerisms. Schiller glanced at his watch and said, my class is about to start, but since this is the task you've assigned to me, I will fulfill it to the best of my ability. With that, he left the room. The new president watched his retreating figure, his expression not favorable. He had a feeling that this man wouldn't be easy to deal with. The next day, an expulsion notice was delivered to Bruce Wayne's desk. It read, Due to your repeated instances of alcohol consumption on campus, organizing gatherings with alcoholic beverages, and confirmation that at least 50 students have consumed alcoholic beverages purchased from you, I regret to inform you, Mr. Wayne, that we will be revoking your enrollment. You must vacate the student dormitory within 3 days. Professor Schiller Rodriguez. The following day, Selden was in his office, massaging his temples. It was clear he was getting anxious. He said to Schiller, I wanted firmness, but, well, yes, firmness indeed, but not this level of firmness. It's too much. Inside, the new president cursed himself. What kind of lunatic had he employed? How could he dare send an expulsion notice to the heir of the Wayne family? They were the biggest benefactors of Gotham University, providing billions of dollars in funding every year. Without Wayne, what use was he as a president? Moreover, it was said that Bruce had been causing trouble for a while now, not at all a pleasant person to deal with. Wasn't he afraid of offending the world's richest person? Schiller still wore his emotionless smile as he said, I believe that sometimes, a stern hand is needed. If we dare expel Bruce Wayne, then no one will dare to violate your alcohol ban. Isn't that right? Selden opened his mouth, but couldn't find words to retort. Schiller's argument was quite reasonable. In all of Gotham University, who could drink the most, dared to drink during the daytime, and misbehave in the school while intoxicated? It was none other than Bruce Wayne. And Schiller was correct, if even Bruce could be expelled, then the other students would surely behave like quails. But the problem was, which private university president would dare to expel the chairman of their own board of directors? The president certainly wouldn't, but Schiller would. He hoped Bruce would leave quickly, otherwise, if Gotham University encountered the Joker, it would be a massive problem. Selden wiped the sweat from his forehead and said, First, let's retract this expulsion notice. I never retract letters I've written myself. However, as the president, you can make a phone call and have him deliver the letter to my office in person. Schiller also tapped the table, mimicking Selden. Mr. President, I am a teacher. Do you expect me to bow and scrape to students who make mistakes? How to please the board of directors is your responsibility as the president, not mine. My duty is to educate and discipline, and I don't care if he's Wayne or someone else, no one is allowed to misbehave in my classroom. This was madness. Selden thought. Schiller was an absolute lunatic. Why did he have to clash with Bruce like this? Bruce was the world's richest person. Your stubbornness astonishes me, Selden said, his face darkening after a moment. I hope you can maintain this rigid style of yours. Schiller smiled and said, I will. In fact, compared to the countless high-profile cases I've faced, dealing with those morally bankrupt criminals and lunatics, Bruce is like a newborn foal. I hope he can stand up in front of me before he learns to run. The principal gazed at Schiller, his face tinged with a sickly pallor. Schiller's gray eyes, hidden behind his glasses, seemed shrouded in an undispellable gray mist. After Schiller departed, the principal pressed the switch of the hidden recording pen beneath his desk. He couldn't help but think that a debonair young man like Schiller couldn't possibly endure such humiliation from a teacher. The words Schiller had spoken today should be etched on his tombstone. If a dismissal notice wasn't enough to rile up Brucerage, then perhaps he needed to add more fuel to the fire. The principal wondered what Bruce's reaction would be after listening to these recordings. Selden mused that such an impetuous and young billionaire could never truly rival the power of capital, no matter Schiller's abilities. The Wayne family had 1,000 ways to make a professor disappear from the world, even if Bruce wasn't that cruel. He wouldn't let someone repeatedly insult him. Bruce received the recording and his expression turned peculiar. He wasn't angry at all, not in the least. In fact, even if this person hadn't been Schiller, Bruce wouldn't have been too upset because he wasn't as impulsive and rash as he appeared. But after listening to the recording, he oddly felt relieved. Thankfully, Schiller hadn't thrown more headaches and unanswerable questions at him, nor had he used that even more malicious tone he usually adopted when pestering Bruce for assignments. Bruce knew this reaction was wrong. How could his standards be so low? Shouldn't he be happier when Schiller praised him? No, this wasn't important. Bruce tossed the recording pen onto his desk and ran his hand through his hair. He had to admit that after listening, he couldn't help but associate it with Batman's recent success in Gotham, which may have caused this change in the professor's attitude. Of course, he was Batman after all, so he quickly refocused on more pressing matters. The principal's targeting of Schiller didn't seem random. He appeared to have an additional source of information, possibly knowing about Schiller's involvement in the previous principal's trial. Bruce narrowed his eyes. It seemed like the principal aimed to establish order at Gotham University, or rather, he wanted to turn it into his personal fiefdom. Dangerous individuals like Schiller were naturally his first targets. The next day, Schiller taught his class as usual, not sparing a glance at Bruce. Selden, who could access classroom cameras, furrowed his brows. Why hadn't Bruce caused any trouble for Schiller? What was going on? Bruce, disguised as a playboy, had stirred up trouble before, even beating up several classmates. Though it wasn't right to beat a professor, for the world's richest person, there was no one he couldn't beat or couldn't afford to compensate. Then, Selden witnessed something even more incredible. When collecting assignments, Bruce handed over a thick stack of papers, likely totaling 3,000 words. When had Bruce ever turned in an assignment? Which professor at Gotham University dared to accept his assignments? Was there any course at Gotham University that wouldn't give him a perfect score? The principal, intrigued, accessed Gotham University's credit system. He discovered that in Schiller's psychology class, Bruce had a score of less than 2 for assignments, and his overall grade was abysmal. The teacher's comment read, "As a billionaire, he certainly diligently enjoys life, but as a student, he is utterly rotten." The principal's hands trembled. This wasn't an internal website, it was a site where all students had to check their final grades. They could clearly see each professor's comments and leave their own feedback. The principal scrolled down, and to his astonishment, he found that Bruce had left a comment for Schiller. "I promise I will complete all assignments next semester. If I do, can my assignment grade be raised to 2, or even 1.8? If I score over 90 on the final exam, I sincerely hope my credits won't be deducted entirely, even if it's just 1 point." Wasn't this a variation of, "Teacher, I'm a bit of a dunce, can you go easy on me?" The principal's face darkened, and he shut down the computer. He felt frustrated. Many people wanted to establish connections with Wayne Enterprises, it could bring them tremendous benefits. The principal was no exception. But it seemed he had no chance. Bruce didn't care whether he was the principal of Gotham University or not, the principal was just a position Bruce could easily replace. However, it appeared that Professor Schiller had indeed tamed the world's richest person. Selden thought, no matter what, he had to get rid of Schiller. To advance further, he needed to have an irreplaceable position in Bruce's eyes, and Schiller was his biggest obstacle. On the other hand, Bruce was growing dissatisfied with this new principal. When he returned the dismissal notice to Schiller, it seemed as if Schiller had written "just leave" already all over his face. Before the new principal arrived, everything had been going smoothly, communication with Schiller and cooperation with Gordon were all conducive to Batman's mission. But then the new principal suddenly imposed a prohibition on alcohol, providing Schiller with another excuse to push him out of school. Bruce couldn't help but feel discontented. Episode 38, Harvey Dent. Regardless of how, the new school principal's campus alcohol ban continued to be implemented in an orderly manner. Any vehicles or shops selling alcoholic beverages were not allowed near Gotham University. All gatherings and parties were closely monitored, and dormitories were searched. They wouldn't confiscate high-powered appliances, but they would unearth all the alcohol and sternly discipline the students. Of course, these students were powerless to resist. Despite Scarecrow's presence as a major villain, most students at Gotham University were still relatively obedient. However, it was clear that this move also stirred up trouble for some. Gotham was a unique city, and everyone knew it. The alcoholics here didn't start drinking after work. Gotham City was home to tens of thousands of alcoholics who supported numerous bars and stores selling liquor. Cigarette and alcohol sales were a significant source of tax revenue each year. You could certainly prevent students from drinking, but if they didn't have a taste for it, who would the liquor merchants sell to? Students were easily influenced, and any hobbies they developed during this period could stay with them for life, including drinking. If they started drinking at the age of 20, they would spend tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars on alcohol over their lifetime. Yet, the profits from selling alcohol were being siphoned off by monopolies. They used these profits to expand production, open larger factories, and employ those alcoholics at lower wages, providing them with 2 bottles of inferior liquor after work as compensation. It was a perfect industry chain, and all they needed to do was to distribute some good beer at low prices near Gotham University, starting with beer, then moving on to distilled spirits and hard liquor. For hundreds of years, Gotham City had operated this way. If you prevented those people from corrupting the students, wouldn't Gotham have become a civilized city with pure-hearted citizens by now? Schiller understood this very well, so he had never intended to be a responsible teacher here. This city didn't allow any clean saplings to grow because only villains and criminals could survive here. Turning Gotham University into a utopia? Don't be ridiculous. Graduates who didn't know better wouldn't last a year in Gotham City. This was just a big whirlpool, with countless smaller whirlpools within it, and no one could escape. Since Schiller sent Bruce that expulsion notice, he rarely mentioned involving him in this matter. But he felt a lot of pressure, having touched the interest chain, so he had to find another helper. Hello, I'm Harvey Dent, a lawyer specializing in criminal litigation and judgments. Schiller and Harvey shook hands. Before Schiller could speak, Harvey said, I've heard about you. You've done a great job with those high-profile cases. That damn serial killer was brought to justice and is now in prison. He spoke quickly, much like a lawyer. His tone was steady and his demeanor confident. Then he continued, but I must say, your efforts in enforcing the alcohol ban at Gotham University haven't been as impressive as your work on those major cases. I believe saving the future of this city is just as important as apprehending criminals, don't you? Schiller released his hand and pursed his lips. Perhaps, he said reluctantly. Harvey sensed the reluctance in his tone and furrowed his brow. I've heard some stories about you down south, but it seems like you're not as relentless as the rumors suggest. Speaking of which, I'm more interested in knowing who's spreading these stories about me. Harvey looked Schiller up and down. He didn't look like a shrewd and brave detective or a fair judge, he appeared refined and suited to his profession. Harvey was intelligent. Are you saying someone is intentionally spreading your stories? But why would they do that? To make you famous? What's in it for them? Schiller gestured for Harvey to take a seat, while he sat across from him. Perhaps you only know the first half of this story. Later on, I was set up by someone in a case in Metropolis. Otherwise, why would I come to Gotham? It's not a good sign, and it's clear these people don't want to let me off the hook. Harvey paused, then said, I'm sorry, you probably shouldn't be in the spotlight right now. But, without a doubt, I support this alcohol ban at Gotham University. Drinking is fine, I indulge occasionally, but excessive drinking during one's student years is unacceptable. When Harvey spoke, his arguments were clear, logical, and delivered with unwavering confidence. If Schiller hadn't already known he would become Two-Face later on, he wouldn't have associated him with that coin-flipping madman. Two-Face was a complex villain, the only one Batman had attempted to save. Batman had tried multiple times but had not succeeded, perhaps because this failure was more devastating than being defeated by the Joker. Because of Harvey Dent, he truly was a good person, Gotham City's White Knight. Batman was deeply influenced by him, and Maroni's attack on Harvey in the courtroom, which drove him insane, made Batman realize that without the use of force, authority, law, and justice meant nothing. A despicable criminal had harmed a fair prosecutor in broad daylight, yet he faced no consequences, and no one dared to bring him to trial again. Schiller placed his hands on the table and looked into Harvey's eyes. Mr. Harvey, I believe you understand the situation here better than the new principal does. You must be aware of how this might offend many people's interests. I'm aware, but I don't care, Harvey replied. Schiller sighed and took off his glasses, using a cloth to wipe them clean. As he wiped, he said, perhaps you are truly prepared to accept the cost of seeking justice? That sounds like you've had quite an experience. Indeed, because I've been lucky. Well, I believe I am too, Harvey said. However, he remained empathetic, adding, I won't condemn those who give up on this road due to the dangers they face. They've already done their best. I don't know how far I can go on this path, but in this world, you don't necessarily have to reach the end to consider it a win. Schiller chose not to respond further. He shook hands with Harvey, who then left. It was the first time Schiller didn't attempt to interfere with or persuade someone through words. Schiller remembered a wise saying, don't try to remind someone who has been walking in the darkness, they are not blind. So Schiller didn't try to correct Harvey's thoughts or tell him that his actions were futile in Gotham. Everything Harvey did was right, every choice was just, but unfortunately, this was Gotham. Neither the White Knight nor the Dark Knight could save Gotham. Harvey was indeed a charismatic individual. Unlike Daredevil Matt, he didn't prefer solo battles. He excelled in utilizing all the resources at his disposal, bonding with students, and even winning the admiration of staff. Mrs. Maffei praised him incessantly and even wanted to introduce her youngest daughter to him. Most students, while unhappy about losing their hidden stashes of alcohol, still admired Harvey. They saw him as a successful and kind-hearted elite professional. Harvey had only been at Gotham University for a few days, yet he was welcomed by almost everyone. The new principal, Selden, became even more depressed. He had sought someone to be his pawn, not realizing that Harvey would become so popular that he would steal the spotlight. Few knew the new principal's name, but almost everyone knew Harvey Dent, the new legal advisor with high education, a high income, and a warm heart. Among the people he bonded with were the hard-to-approach Schiller and Bruce. Schiller was willing to discuss life ideals with him, as their educational backgrounds were similar, and they were both alumni of Columbia University, providing them with a shared campus experience. Bruce, on the other hand, felt a strong connection with Harvey. They could discuss anything, and Harvey provided Bruce with different perspectives on justice, greatly inspiring Batman. In contrast to Schiller's often intellectually stimulating conversations, which left Batman stimulated and reflective, Harvey was different. He answered Bruce's questions in detail and didn't mock or disrupt his speech rhythm when they had differing views. He calmly listened, expressed his own opinions, and carefully analyzed the differences. If they couldn't agree, they each preserved their viewpoints for another discussion. No one disliked having a friend like Harvey, wise, seasoned, enthusiastic, empathetic, and knowledgeable. This was much better than visiting Schiller and getting stressed to the point of aging 10 years. Schiller was also happy because, with Harvey around, Bruce wouldn't pester him every day, and the therapy room finally became quiet. Apart from Gordon's visit a few days later to invite Schiller to celebrate his promotion, hardly anyone else appeared. Gordon didn't have many friends, and some of his police station colleagues were envious, so he couldn't invite them. Instead, he planned to have a small gathering with Schiller and Bruce. Bruce introduced Harvey to the detective. They hit it off, and in a way, Harvey and Gordon were the perfect duo. They were very similar, with Harvey being more radical and Gordon more conservative. As these two hit it off, Bruce was left out in the cold. Schiller, holding a glass of wine, watched Bruce standing outside the therapy room and said, "Let me see, has the homeless stray finally remembered the garbage dump he used to live in? Should I feel honored?" "Hey, don't say that," Bruce replied. "Although Harvey is great, I still think you're stronger in terms of professional competence." "Thank you for the compliment, but I'm sure your credits for this semester will be deducted to 0. Episode 39, Batman's Peach-Colored Crisis. It's like this. Ever since that night, she keeps going to that neighborhood. It's incredibly dangerous, and I don't know how to persuade her. She doesn't even like Bruce, and she even canceled our date, but I'm sure." Schiller poured himself some champagne and said, "She's been going to the Gotham slums for several nights in a row, and nothing dangerous has happened. Are you sure she's just an ordinary person?" Bruce wiped his face and said, "That's exactly what worries me the most. If she were just an ordinary girl, it wouldn't be a big deal. But if she's not ordinary and keeps following me every day, what can I do?" To understand this situation, we have to go back to the previous case. After dealing with Jonathan's case, Bruce didn't completely remove himself, or rather, Batman encountered other troubles. Last time, Batman rescued Christine from the thugs who had kidnapped her. He thought she was unconscious, but as it turns out, she was conscious. Since that day, this beautiful girl fell in love with Batman. Correct, it was Batman, not Bruce. She even directly cancelled her date with Bruce that was scheduled for a few days later. Every night, she went to the same neighborhood where she had been kidnapped to see if Batman would show up again. In a way, you should be happy because of Batman's charm. She even dumped the world's richest person for him. Bruce opened his mouth, his expression complicated. Being liked by a beautiful girl is definitely something to be happy about. However, this situation is so strange and bizarre that if it were written in a romance novel, it would take at least 100,000 words to fully explain. In terms of your personal feelings, I don't have any advice for you, except to protect your kidneys, Schiller said in conclusion. Bruce didn't expect Schiller's prediction to come true so quickly. That evening, Batman was still patrolling Gotham. He had become quite famous in Gotham recently because he had cleaned up the slums around the Morrison district. This time, he wasn't patrolling the dirty and rundown slums, but the luxury neighborhoods where robberies often occurred. In fact, the probability of serious crimes happening here was no smaller than in the slums. While the slums were usually filled with drunk brawls, gang extortion, or group fights, in the luxury neighborhoods, once a gunshot rang out, there would be at least 2 or 3 people lying in a pool of blood. And the store employees were also likely to be killed. The severity of these cases was no less than the gang fights in the slums. Moreover, those who dared to commit these crimes were often experienced professionals who cooperated well, planned carefully, and left as soon as the job was done. They were not easy to deal with. Batman had already taken down 2 robbery gangs, partly due to their bad luck. When Batman had just upgraded and moved from the slums to this area, he stumbled upon a robbery murder case. They had killed 2 female store employees and stolen jewelry from the store, and by coincidence, a string of pearl necklaces was scattered on the ground. So, this gang was now in a big prison. The other gang wasn't much smarter. They were a group of inexperienced thieves who had the misfortune of running into Batman and were now also behind bars. On this day, Batman was standing on the rooftop of a building opposite a jewelry store. He watched as a shadow slipped through the window at the back of the jewelry store. The figure was petite but agile. The female store clerk on the other side hadn't even reacted before she was subdued. It seemed that she was a female thief, correct, a thief, not a robber. She didn't break the glass of the jewelry counter but found the keys on one of the employees and opened the glass door of the jewelry counter. Just as she was admiring the luster of a gemstone, a shadow appeared behind her. He said, "Miss, no matter how you look at it, this gem doesn't belong to you." She turned around, but before she could react, she was knocked unconscious. The female thief seemed to have better luck. Just as Batman was about to drag her to hand her over to the police, a group of robbers rushed into the nearby antique store. These were the real robbers, wearing masks, carrying submachine guns, and holding bags. They forced the store employees into a corner at gunpoint. Batman had to put down the female thief and deal with them. By the time he returned, she had disappeared. However, the story didn't end there. Over the next few days, Batman felt someone following him, but the person seemed agile, and several times Batman failed to capture them. Until one day, Batman set a small trap. He pretended to throw a bag of gemstones he had just confiscated from a robber into a trash can on the street corner. Sure enough, the petite figure sneaked into the trash can to pick up the items. Batman reached out to capture her, but she unexpectedly retaliated with a claw, nearly scratching him. Seeing that it was Batman, the female thief suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. Batman held his arm and asked, "The gemstones, where are they? Don't you think our ears match well?" Her voice was sweet, and after speaking, she flicked her ear on her mask with her finger. Correct, there were 2 ears on her mask as well, although not as pointed as Batman's. They were in a similar overhead position. In a moment of confusion, Batman said, "Are you another bat?" "Bats?" The female thief exclaimed in disbelief, "Who's bats?" "I'm Catwoman. Don't only cats have ears like these? Do you really think you're a bat? What kind of weirdo would identify as that animal?" "Catwoman." Batman pondered the name for a moment. Then, he retrieved a bag of jewels from the trash can and tossed it to her, saying, "No cat would fancy jewels. Stop troubling the jewelry store employees. Since you haven't taken a life, I'll let you off the hook." With that, he turned to leave but was halted as Catwoman caught his cape. She chuckled, shaking the bag in her hand, and said, "Rich person, you must have some of these, right?" Batman furrowed his brow, wondering why everyone seemed to see through his wealth. He had intentionally toned down his Batman attire, avoided using any high-end gadgets, and even slightly misaligned his beard. Without turning around, Batman replied, "I don't have any. You can't expect a bat to possess such things." Before he could leave, a whip coiled around his waist. Batman felt no force pulling him, but a soft figure pressed against his back. He heard Catwoman's voice close to his ear, "If you were a bat, you'd be the most interesting bat I've ever encountered. We'll meet again." With that, she leaped onto a wall in a nearby alley and swiftly disappeared. Batman touched his ear, thinking, a cat that likes jewels? Truly an eccentric. Just like himself. Unexpectedly, on his way back to the city, Batman encountered Christine, the beautiful leader of a cheerleading squad, dressed in a thick down jacket and a hat that concealed her sexy figure and gorgeous face. Batman considered avoiding her, but he thought better of it. It was too dangerous for a girl to appear on the streets of Gotham at this hour. Christine spotted Batman and happily ran toward him. But as she reached his side, she frowned and asked, "Do you have a girlfriend? Are you on a date with her?" Batman was perplexed. He simply said, "You shouldn't be out here. It's dangerous." "But I just wanted to be your girlfriend," Christine shrugged. It was clear that she didn't often say this, as usually, others confessed their feelings to her. "I don't need a girlfriend." "Please, go back," Batman replied. "Then what's with the Louis Vuitton perfume on you? Don't tell me you like women's scents." Batman had a headache. After spending years in the shadows, how could he possibly understand such things? He knew he had been embraced by Catwoman, but he hadn't expected this female thief, who sneaked out at night to steal, to be wearing such strong perfume. Batman said nothing and left, cloaking himself in his cape. Although Batman had no interest in Christine, someone else was very interested in her, the new school principal, Selden. Don't forget, it was Christine who accused the former principal of kidnapping her, providing the most significant evidence for his conviction. Selden knew that the Jonathan case, which implicated the former principal and led to Victor's downfall, had a mastermind behind it, connecting all the dots. There were too many mysteries left unsolved. Who had subdued Jonathan? Who had rescued Christine? Gordon alone couldn't solve it. Selden believed that even if Christine didn't know the mastermind personally, she had information about them. He wanted to get to the bottom of it, understand the relationships connected to the Jonathan case, and secure his position. Gotham's web of relationships was incredibly complex, and he needed a good entry point. Selden believed that the Jonathan case was the best investigative lead. On the other hand, Batman and Catwoman's relationship progressed rapidly. Perhaps destiny had a hand in it. Catwoman's liveliness and romance were a stark contrast to Batman's seriousness and suspicion, yet she had him captivated. They often roamed Gotham together at night. While Catwoman couldn't assist Batman in combat, her skills in infiltration and reconnaissance were unmatched. Catwoman had a fondness for various gemstone jewelry, and Batman had the means to acquire them. However, the topic of theft was a constant source of disagreement between them. Batman believed Catwoman had a stealing habit, while Catwoman saw it as mere appreciation for the jewelry that sat untouched in display cases. She argued that if nobody was buying them, why not take them and enjoy them for a few days? Finally, one day, Batman tracked Catwoman once more and intervened in her theft. Catwoman, enraged, slapped him and then, using a short dagger, stabbed him in the side. And so, what began as a romantic escapade involving Batman turned into a genuine crisis of life and kidney. Episode 40, The Cat and the Bat, 1. In the previous episode, Bruce lay on the hospital bed while Harvey adjusted his upper body and offered him a glass of water. Bruce, with a hint of distress, remarked, "She's unpredictable, her moods are ever-changing, truly resembling a cat. I can't quite fathom her. Right now, my main concern is that her volatility could harm others. After all, I have access to the best medical resources in all of Gotham, but not everyone does. You should be grateful that your kidney didn't rupture. The knife was quite short, leaving only a shallow scratch on your organs. Otherwise, you might have been left with just one kidney now," Harvey said as he set down the water jug. Harvey continued, "Back when I was in school, I had a crush on a girl. I was head over heels for her. I pursued her passionately. But one day, while we were on a date, she deliberately threw a bottle far away to mock a janitor. I couldn't understand how she could do that. She seemed so mean, unworthy of my affection. But later, I realized that my love for her had painted an idealized image in my mind. In reality, she had always been ill-tempered, enjoyed mocking others, and looked down on anyone in the service industry. She never changed, but because of my intense love, I had unrealistically high expectations of her. I broke up with her, and she found it inexplicable. At that time, I didn't know that I must have appeared like a lunatic, first pursuing her recklessly, declaring my love, and then suddenly ending things cleanly. To anyone, it would seem like an insult, and she was furious. Later, I thought it was only natural." Bruce felt a bit embarrassed, but continued, "The problem with that girl is much worse than your ex-girlfriend's, and it could potentially harm others, physically. The issue isn't here, it's that when you met her and fell in love with her, didn't you know about this flaw?" Harvey questioned. Bruce wondered, did he not know? He knew all too well. He had even met her in the midst of Catwoman's criminal activities. He couldn't help but think ironically, how could he fall in love with a criminal? Especially at a crime scene? After Harvey left, Bruce fell asleep due to fatigue. In the dream, the dazzling lights of a jewelry store illuminated a string of pearls scattered on the ground. Suddenly, all the lights went out, as if everything had returned to that dark alley, with only the string of pearls shimmering faintly. Batman never liked anything related to jewelry, especially things that sparkled, like a true bat. Yet, his mind was filled with the image of the girl holding sparkling gems, her sly smile. In the haze, the luster of the pearls in his memory suddenly didn't seem so repulsive. The dream's conclusion was still a swarm of bats soaring through the sky, their shadows heavy. The next day, when Schiller saw Bruce in the psychological counseling room, he was somewhat surprised. He examined Bruce and said, "Your injuries have healed already? You can walk so soon?" "It's still a bit painful, but it's no longer a major concern. My internal organs weren't seriously damaged, and they're healing rapidly," Bruce replied. Schiller remarked, "In that case, it seems you won't be needing my coffee." He poured himself a hot cup of coffee and left Bruce somewhat speechless. Bruce then requested, "Could you get me a glass of water?" Once they were both seated, Bruce began, "Harvey doesn't know my true identity yet, and I think it's best to keep it that way for now. But I'm troubled by something. The woman who stabbed me keeps appearing in my dreams. I'm even starting to feel a reluctance towards putting on the batsuit. When I do encounter her, I don't know what to say." Schiller couldn't have dreamt that Batman's first psychological counseling question would be about Bruce's teenage romantic troubles. As is well known, in the comics, Batman and Catwoman share a deep love, and screenwriters have spent a considerable amount of ink detailing their love story. Indeed, a dark knight with a vendetta and a cunning yet beautiful criminal, even in the grim backdrop of Gotham City, resonates with many readers. Schiller said, "It seems Harvey has tried to counsel you already, but it doesn't seem to have helped much." Harvey had valid points. Before falling for her, I knew she was a thief. In fact, I met her while she was stealing from a jewelry store. I don't understand how I could fall for a criminal. It's absurd, Bruce admitted. Schiller asked, "What do you think led you to become Batman?" Bruce pondered for a moment before replying, "Many things." "And what do you think led her to become a thief?" Schiller inquired. Bruce fell silent. "So, you're here sulking without any understanding of a woman's past and family. Are you sure you really like her, and it's not just a desire for a romantic encounter?" Schiller asked. "I haven't even been to bed with her yet," Bruce replied. "Should I applaud your innocence?" Schiller chuckled, then turned his gaze to Bruce's side. "She stabbed your kidney without even reaching that stage. I'm starting to worry about your safety. Do you think I should talk to her?" Bruce asked. Schiller sighed and said, "You like the thief, not me. If you want to talk about love, go talk to her. Understand?" Schiller added with some resignation, "Otherwise, what's the point of a relationship? You've been roaming Gotham's rooftops for days, and you still don't know each other's parents. You're not sleeping together, not dating, and you're in the dark about each other. If it were me, I might have stabbed you too." Bruce paused for a moment and said, "All right, I'll go talk to her." The next day, Batman once again caught Catwoman at an exhibition. Although he didn't understand Catwoman's past and family, he had a good grasp of her habits. Upon seeing him, Catwoman cursed softly and immediately thought of escaping. However, she didn't run. Batman captured her cape again, and Catwoman cursed, took a deep breath, and turned her head to say, "Let go of me. You freak. Don't make me use my knife." Batman said, "We need to talk." "What do we have to talk about?" "Don't bother me while I'm working," Catwoman replied, exasperated. 10 minutes later, the two of them arrived at the rooftop of the exhibition hall. Catwoman reluctantly waved her hand and said, all right, my little man, what do you want to talk about? Give me the big reason? I practically memorized all your reasons." "No, I just want to hear your story," Batman said. Catwoman was a bit surprised. She fell silent for a moment, glanced at Batman's pointed ears overhead, and said, "Well, considering your aesthetics when it comes to costumes, fine. I come from the slums in the East, you know, the biggest and messiest one. My mother was an alcoholic, my father was a drug addict, but I was lucky not to get caught up in drugs. I grew up with a retired acrobat. She taught me a lot of things, but she had a temper, and I took quite a few beatings. But I learned real skills. When she tried to sell me to a foul-smelling middle-aged man, I ran away. I was 12 at the time. Later, a nosy orphanage insisted that I live there, and I said okay, so I did. Afterward, someone wanted to adopt me, but I offended the administrator, who wanted to abuse me, so I stole his diamond necklace and ran away again. I met a leader of thieves, we all called her Lucky Mom. She specialized in training girls like us to steal things for her. I had practiced acrobatics, and I was good at it. I was her favorite child. But good times didn't last. She found the diamond necklace I had hidden, you know, it was worth a lot, enough for her to retire and quit working. She wanted me to give it to her, but I didn't want to, so I ran away again. Later, I met a sister named Maggie, and she was good to me. But her boyfriend kept abusing her and even tried to kill her. When he was about to attack, I killed that man and became a fugitive. I didn't want to endanger my sister, so I've been wandering ever since, but sometimes, when I earned money, I would send some back. So, that's it, a very ordinary story, not that exciting. I suppose nothing in your life experience is as thrilling, right? Great hero. Batman seemed a bit quiet. He said, not exciting enough? Isn't it exciting enough? Catwoman shook her head and said, "Oh, I forgot, you're a young master who grew up in a wealthy area. People from your place should all go to school and follow the rules, right? But it's not like that where we come from. In our area, there aren't even 1 or 2 students in an entire block. Actually, my mother loved me, but she was controlled by alcohol. She spent more time on the cat than on me. My parents didn't have the means to send me to school, and my neighbors were the same way. Having at least one sober parent was considered lucky, at least that way you wouldn't starve. I heard stories of parents on both sides being drunk, and their kids climbing onto stoves and getting scalded to death. Of course, the upbringing of people like us is quite similar. The luckier ones, like me, learned a skill, and the best way out was to work for a gang. If you could become a dealer in a casino, that was a dignified job. Maggie's boyfriend was a casino enforcer. He was very popular, and several hostesses there were vying for his attention. Actually, Lucky Mom treated me well at times. She would be like a real mother sometimes. Whenever I stole a lot of jewelry for her, she would praise me and even give me candy. Of course, she would scold and beat the children who couldn't steal anything, but in my opinion, they were just young. With a few years of practice, they would be fine. Catwoman spoke in a lively and casual tone, making her life sound intriguing. For instance, when she practiced acrobatics and fell from a roof for the first time, she landed on a drunkard who had just pocketed over $10 from someone else. She ended up with the money and used it to buy food for her mother's cat, receiving a kiss from her mother in return. Batman had remained silent, listening quietly. Catwoman eventually stopped talking and looked at Batman, saying, "Well, I know this story might disappoint you. I don't have a rich and exciting academic background, and I don't understand your career goals. We come from entirely different worlds, and I'm sure wealthy people like you aren't interested in the life of the slums. After all, it sounds dirty and chaotic." Batman's voice was somewhat low as he said, "No, this is the most exciting story I've ever heard." Catwoman raised an eyebrow and said, "You have such a sweet mouth, your praise makes me a little embarrassed. But I'm happy too, because not many people are willing to listen to me talk about these things. Maggie isn't in good health, she can't go outside. When we chat, she prefers to hear about my adventures in the wealthy area, about the rich ladies and their dresses and necklaces." Batman asked, "Do you really like jewelry that much?" "I knew you were going to ask that question," Catwoman blinked and said. "At first, it was because these jewelry could get me better treatment from Lucky Mom, and I didn't want to get beaten. But later, when Lucky Mom asked me for that diamond necklace, I realized that what I loved was their natural luster, not how much they could be sold for. The thought of Lucky Mom selling these treasures for money hurt me. That captivating shine, especially when it's illuminated by light, is the most beautiful thing in the world. My lifelong dream is to have a huge castle filled with all these beautiful gemstones." Catwoman's tone became increasingly cheerful, as if she were about to burst with happiness.